Welcome to Fintech Confidential, bringing you the people, tech, and companies that change how you pay and get paid. The FTC's rule will end these tricks and traps, saving Americans time and money.
The goal of the rule is to make it easier for consumers to cancel their subscriptions, but the rule goes well beyond that. Perhaps for the first time that I can think of in FTC's history, they've actually kind of designed exactly. The FTC was persuaded by that. It could sometimes be confusing. And in some cases, if it's just a subscription, like that's the whole transaction, what else is the consumer consenting to?
When you're talking about changing the way a business fundamentally works, it's not very much time to keep yourself out of hot water.
The ability to allow a consumer to self-serve and manage their own order within seconds drastically reduces frustration and increases save rates quite a bit. It's forcing the merchants to deliver better value for the consumer, which is something that should always happen. You might lose them today, but the ability to allow them to cancel and reactivate them at a later date is a strategy they have to have in place.
It's always been a scenario where subscriptions are hard to cancel or membership is hard to cancel.
And to me, that is just crazy. And I'm super excited because this rule solves that problem.
I know I've been locked into a subscription that I didn't want to be in for almost a year, and I couldn't figure out a way to cancel it.
A lot of companies saw this coming. If you're doing a free trial, and all your advertising says is free, and they don't find out that they're going to be charged unless they cancel, let's say, until they get to the transaction point, that's going to be considered misleading. You may think it's simple, but if you're getting a lot of complaints from consumers who are still saying it's difficult to cancel, you're going to have a hard time convincing the FTC or another regulator. Despite best efforts, you're going to have folks that aren't going to do it right.
Don't be afraid of drop off. If you're running your business correctly.
If it was easy, everybody would have a successful continuity brand.
FTC, they will come in with their initial demand, can often be the full amount of the penalties, which could be in the hundreds of millions.
Your business can be shut down in a heartbeat if you're not even trying.
If you want to play in the sandbox, you better adjust.
Bring your shovels and your buckets to the sandbox, people. You're going to be building the
That's
castle.
At the end of the day, there were a lot of businesses reported that it was better for business. It had minimal impact on conversion rates.
That is an opportunity for you to increase your income, increase your revenues on the bottom line. Because when you fix those things, that means your expenses go down and your sales go up. Taking action now is only going to make things better for you in the long run. Hey, Tedd Huff here. Ever thought about how you could streamline your application and underwriting process? Well, let me introduce you to Under. Why keep using the outdated methods of PDFs when you can digitize them effortlessly? All you gotta do is upload the PDF, send it out for digital signature, and voila, you're set for the digital age. Are you curious on how to make that happen? Head over to under.io/FTC and get started for free. It's really that simple. Welcome to another episode of Fintech Confidential's Uncut. I'm your host, Tedd Huff, and we are here today diving straight into the heart of what matters in fintech. No fillers, no fluff, just the raw, uncut truth. We're here to challenge the norms, question everything, and share our unfiltered thoughts. So let's get into it and explore what's shaping the future of fintech right here, right now. Today, we are diving into something that's not just making waves, but it's set to fundamentally shift how businesses operate, especially those in the subscription space. We're talking about the FTC's new click to cancel rule. We've all been that consumer who's frustrated because canceling a subscription feels like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube completely blindfolded. On October 16th, 2024, the FTC decided enough was enough. They published their final rule concerning recurring subscriptions and other negative option programs. Now, this is part of the FTC's ongoing review of the 1973 negative option rule. Now, the agency's goal was to modernize to combat unfair or deceptive practices related to subscriptions, memberships, and other recurring payment programs. And especially at a time where it's easier than ever for businesses to sign up consumers for their products and services. The FTC Commission Chair, Lina Khan, explained that the new rule's purpose by saying too often businesses make people jump through endless hoops just to cancel a subscription. The FTC's rule will end these tricks and traps, saving Americans time and money, and nobody should be stuck paying for a service they no longer want. Now, that sounds pretty simple, but there's more than a few nuances for businesses that rely on subscription models. This isn't just a minor tweak. This is a seismic shift in the market. And to help us unpack what this means, we've got a few industry heavyweights with us today. To break down the legal implications and to inform us on how this new rule might be interpreted, we have Linda Goldstein, a legal powerhouse at Baker Hostetler, who has been closely following this rule from its early beginnings as a proposal. And to understand how businesses can convert this new rule into new dollars, former advertiser Carl D'Agostino, the founder and CEO of Solvpath, a technology that transforms the customer support experience, will share what their data and insights are saying and how businesses can capitalize on this new rule. Jayare Charron, the VP of Partnerships, is also joining the discussion because he spent most of his career helping businesses maximize profitability, and he will share what he's hearing in the market. So before we get started, I want to say thank you, everybody, for joining. Hopefully I did justice to explaining what's going on, why it's going on, and how we're going to be able to help people get informed on what's next. Linda, I want to dive in with you first. You've been following this inside and out for what probably feels like forever. Before we discuss all the implications that come along with it, could you share with us what the 4 core tenets are of this rule?
The goal of the rule, as you said, is to make it easier for consumers to cancel their subscriptions. But the rule goes well beyond that. And so first of all, it basically says that if you make any misrepresentation in your advertising or offer that is for a subscription or some other recurring billing arrangement like continuity or automatic renewal, even if it has nothing to do with the negative, what the FTC calls the negative option feature, which is the recurring billing aspect. Let's say it's something about your product that you're selling that the FTC doesn't think is substantiated. They can, again, even though this rule is designed to regulate negative option, they can go after you under this rule for violating the rule. And the reason that's so important is that right now, it's a little more challenging for the FTC to run into federal court and get money when companies misrepresent their products and services because of a Supreme Court decision. This rule has automatic civil penalties of over $50,000 per violation. And so suddenly to your program and some subscriptions, there's no other way to market it. You've now exposed your entire advertising campaign to potential civil penalties. So that's number one. Number two is there are very specific requirements for disclosing the material terms of the offer. And those requirements are you basically have to disclose that this is a recurring billing arrangement. You have to disclose what the costs will be to you. You have to disclose the deadline by frequency you have to cancel to avoid charges. And you have to tell consumers where they can get information about cancellation. The third piece is on consent. And basically, it's not going to be enough to just tell the consumer, this is a subscription program that continues until you cancel. You're going to have to get their specific consent to that recurring billing or subscription component of the offer. And they've provided a safe harbor, which is either a checkbox, a signature, or some other mechanism by which you have to get that consent. And that consent has to be immediately adjacent to where you provided your notice of all the terms. So perhaps for the first time that I can think of in FTC's history, they've actually kind of designed exactly what, with respect to this, your advertising is going to have to look like, because you're going to have to design it so your disclosure and your consent are immediately next to each other. And the fourth component is the cancellation. The bottom line is it has to be as easy to cancel as it was to consent to the offer in the first place. So those are the four pillars.
Yeah, the coming across with the prohibitive of misrepresentation, requiring the disclosures. It was great how you dove into those in a little bit. And we'll get a little more detailed into it. But the affirmative consent and then these simple cancellation requirements are really, really big pieces throughout this whole thing. But it didn't end up the way the proposal was. Can you walk us briefly through what changed between the proposal and the final rule and your perspective on why those changes happened?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I will say, and I'll talk about these, that two of the proposals that had, generated the most criticism and concern were that originally, I would say number one on the list, originally the rule would have prohibited any type of save a sale or communication with the consumer who was trying to cancel without first asking their permission. And part of the concern with that is if the consumer doesn't know what you're about to tell them, how do they know if they want to hear it or not? And so the commission dropped that, but I don't want people to think that's a free-for-all suddenly for doing 10 upsells or whatever. We can get into that, but they did drop it. So it's at best ambiguous. What does a simple method that is as easy as the consent to enroll, to purchase mean? But they dropped that. They also had a provision in there that said that the consent to the negative option feature had to be separate from the consent to the rest of the transaction, which would have meant technically you had to have two consents, one to the negative option and one to the entire transaction as a whole. And there were a lot of criticisms of that as well. The FTC was persuaded by that could sometimes be confusing. And in some cases, if it's just a subscription, like that's the whole transaction, what else is the consumer consenting to? So they dropped the requirement that you have to have separate consent. However, as a practical matter, depending on your offer, you might need that anyway, but at least you have the flexibility to think about how you're going to present your offer and how you're going to get the consents. They also were going to require an annual reminder of, the fact that you're enrolled in some kind of a subscription program where the products and services were not hard goods, but more digital publications and things like that. And they dropped that as well. I do want to say that with respect to the save a sale and the separate consent, they dropped it for now. And they said that they might have a supplemental hearing in which they would request more information. So they were saying, we need more information about this before we do it. Now you asked me, why did they make those changes? I don't think they made those changes because they love the industry and they wanted to, give some concessions to the industry. I think they made those changes because those were the most hotly contested elements of the rule. It is still highly likely that the rule will be challenged because there are real issues as to whether they followed the procedures for this rulemaking that they need to follow. And most recently, the FTC's attempt to ban non-competes was struck down by a court. The court said they exceeded their authority. I think they wanted to eliminate the most controversial parts of this rule in the hopes that it will be less vulnerable to a challenge. And we'll have to wait to see what happens there.
So you mentioned there can be challenges, there could be some amendments, some changes, a couple of things they're just kind of playing waiting to see to figure out whether or not to push harder on it. When does this rule go into effect?
So for the misrepresentation piece, because technically that's what the law requires, it's 60 days. For the rest of the rule, where companies merely might have to change their customer journey processes, their cancellation mechanisms, and there are a lot of operational things that might have to happen, it's 180 days.
Oh, well, that sounds like a lot of time, but when you're talking about changing the way a business fundamentally works, it's not very much time to put some things in place to solve for this and to keep yourself out of hot water the best you possibly can.
Yeah, no, not at all.
So I think, Linda, you gave us a really solid understanding of the rules and the core pieces behind it, what the changes were. And really what I want to do is I want to shift over and talk about how this is going to impact businesses and what opportunities could arise from it. And Carl, I know you and I have talked about there are a number of opportunities out there for these businesses. But before we dive into that, share a little bit more about Solvpath and its roles in helping businesses adapt to these changes.
Solvpath originally was born and it was created to help automate customer support. A majority of our businesses, when we originally built Solvpath, was pretty much figuring out ways to help allowing consumers to manage their own orders and manage their own subscriptions through a front-facing portal. We originally built it for our own brands many years ago to mitigate disputes and chargebacks, try to drive down cost, and kind of control the customer support experience, and leveraging data and information to potentially, hopefully, get them to stay or deflect the cancellation or return that really impacted our bottom line. And we've been doing that for the last 7.5 years. Statistically, right now, for demographics under the ages of 65, 75% of consumers today actually prefer or expect some form of self-service to manage their orders and subscriptions online. Save rates are substantially higher when you get that customer in front of an option much faster. Phone calls, emails typically have, if you try to save a customer through an email, for instance, there's a lot of back and forth, and there's a longer period of time that goes by. So it increases levels of frustration. Phone, you got hold times and delays. So the ability to allow a consumer to self-serve and manage their own order within seconds drastically reduces frustration and increases save rates quite a bit.
The most common cause of bad customer experience isn't that high tech. It's embarrassingly simple. Yep, it's answering questions. In e-commerce, it's really easy to get bogged down with common questions, whether that's where's my package, how do I return or exchange this item, or just to cancel a subscription. Solvpath is an AI-driven customer support system that enhances the customer experience with visual formats and self-serve technology to empower your customers to handle their own support requests. Get the best customer support system for your business. Get Solvpath. Get started by visiting getsolvpath.com. You guys have some really big names on your books, and you get a lot of data, which gives you tons of insights. How are you seeing this rule impacting subscription businesses going forward?
It depends on how they approach their business. I think if you're going with a consumer first approach where you really want to, some are clients that really care about the consumer experience. They care about delivering a really high quality product as long as they're going with that approach, I think all in all, and a lot of our clients are already doing this, the impact that some of these people think that their churn is going to be much higher than it is. I disagree. I think we see high pause and people like for nutraceuticals, the ability to push back their next bill date and adjust the billing frequency. But I also think it's going to take some of those merchants that are not doing that, and it's going to allow them to start focusing more on offering better package, better quality product, being a little more proactive in my efforts on what I put in the actual inserts to make sure it's easy to use. It's forcing the merchants to deliver better value for the consumer, which is something that should always happen anyway. But the people that are the clients that are just coming in and trying to create this cookie cutter setup and not really spend a lot of time focusing on the customer, I think that's going to change quite a bit.
You mentioned cookie cutter setup, right? A lot of people think this is something that I can just read the rule, which I'm looking at it here. It is how many pages? I'm still scrolling, by the way. 230 pages long, by the way. So they think they can read this 230 page document, create one size that fits all. But how are you using data, and what is the role of data for you in predicting and managing the best way to approach this to reduce subscription churn?
You should not be able to make the canceling of a subscription or even an order difficult for a customer. So let's just say you had 2 or maybe even as much as 3 opportunities to potentially save a sale or save that continuity. You would want to have your best foot forward, right? So the ability to recognize what billing cycle they're on, what particular product, what their cancel reason was, really analyze that information and that data. So if you are putting something in front of them, it's really an intelligent, thought out response that allows you to actually increase the likelihood of potentially putting something in front of them that's going to actually help you save that sale or that continuity. So utilizing data and allowing the software and our technology, or any other technology for that matter, to be able to have more intelligent responses. What am I putting in front of that customer? That data in itself, maybe even historic data as to what worked for very similar types of demographics, style of products, and we can leverage that data to potentially increase their bottom line and obviously increased retention.
Yeah. Do you have any examples that you could share with us? Businesses that are already ahead of the curve and somewhat prepared for this compliance challenge that has just been released?
It's always the 11th hour. And I'm sure Linda's come across this too. Like they're probably making those phone calls now. I'm sure Linda's phone is just as busy as ours, or people that want to start testing, getting an idea of what it's going to do and how it's going to impact our bottom line. So this is something that should have been happening already for just the state of California, New York. I think it's Montana, Vermont. There's a couple of states, and some of those states are actually a lot more aggressive than the FTC ruling that just recently came out. California, like you can't downsell somebody. There's a lot more aggressive restrictions. So we're able, for our clients that are specifically people that have a little more TV oriented type of marketing and advertising where they're really out there, they've been running California. So just really dialing into California support funnels and seeing how that impacted. Yeah, we were able to see it. And I, like I said earlier, it took a little time to figure out exactly what the right approach was, but we do have support funnels and flows that we feel that would be compliant. Obviously, as she's translating and interpreting this new law, I think we should be, I'm pretty confident actually, I think everybody can be pleased with the outcome and the number. But there is more of a post-sale strategy here too. You might lose them today, but the ability to allow them to cancel and reactivate them at a later date is a strategy they have to have in place too.
As I was reading through the document and reading through the different commentaries on this new rule, I started to read it and look through it. And with all of my time in payments, especially merchant bank card acquiring side of the house, it's kind of funny. I thought a lot of these things are already in place with the credit card brands. So Visa, MasterCard was a little bit more aggressive on this. So it's really fun for me to see that now it's not just Visa and MasterCard, American Express, Discover. I can't leave anybody out, but they now have a little bit of air cover when it comes to these things, and they have something to lean back on. It's not just them trying to protect their brand as it's looked at a lot of times. This is really a way to protect the consumer. It's a way to ensure that everybody gets what they desired. And I really like the fact that I was able to draw a lot of parallels to the deceptive practices, to the easy cancellation, to the express consent, because those things already existed in one way, shape, or another inside of the card brand rules. So it was really nice to see that happen. And Carl, now that we've spent time understanding Solvpath and going through that, I want to lean a little bit on Jayare, because Jayare, you spent a lot of time in this space as well, and probably more than any of us on the retailer or the merchant side of the house. Are there particular industries or business models that you're familiar with that are going to need to make significantly larger adjustments than others?
Yeah, I think there are. Let's talk about the ones that won't have to make the massive adjustments first, right? I come from a Shopify space, and for the last 10 years, that's been a compliance piece anyways when it comes to subscriptions. Obviously, there's a few gotchas in the ruling, the way that I read it. You get into direct marketing, performance marketing, some of the bad actors. It's always been a scenario where subscriptions are hard to cancel or membership is hard to cancel. Given that, and you look at those back-end CRMs, the more headless e-commerce solutions out there, they don't have an app besides Solvpath that's pre-built. So it comes down to custom coding. It comes down to custom solutions to essentially make that happen and make you compliant. Like I said, there's some gotchas in there, but those other guys are going to have a harder time for sure.
You're making me think of, I'm not going to name the fitness company particularly, but there's one that I had joined because it was a fabulous deal to get started. And I ended up paying them for about 10 months longer because it required me to either show up in person to cancel it, even though I'd already moved, or to have a legal letter sent to their corporation telling them that has been notarized, by the way, that I had moved and I no longer wanted that to be part of that chain. And to me, that is just crazy. And I'm super excited because this rule solves that problem for me. But it makes me wonder, gems are one thing. What about subscription boxes? What about these other pieces that maybe have a little bit of variation in their month to month? How are you seeing the conversation around supporting this new rule with that?
It depends on where those subscriptions box companies live, right? Your Shopify brands, your subscription brands that sit there, your Bolds, your Recharges, all of these different subscriptions companies, you get onto those more headless solutions and it makes it a heck of a lot harder. So if you're not showing that compliance or you don't have anything built, this isn't something that happens overnight unless you get a solution like Solvpath. You can literally spend tens of thousands of dollars getting that managed subscriptions compliance piece in check. It's not something that happens overnight to fix this from a custom coding perspective.
Do you feel like this is something that this rule is leveling the playing field for the large corps versus the smaller guys that maybe are on Shopify, or is that just a perception that I have?
I think it's leveling the playing field in general for the consumer. At least that's the way the rule reads for me. I know I've been locked into a subscription that I didn't want to be in for almost a year, and I couldn't figure out a way to cancel it. In fact, I couldn't figure out who to call, or I think it's leveling the playing field for the consumer in general, be it a large corporation or a smaller corporation. And hey, those larger corporations, I look at a Procter & Gamble, for example. I look at a company like that. I've subscribed to things on their sub-brands and stuff, and they've already had that compliance piece in check. I've easily been able to unsubscribe.
Jay, I appreciate you going through that and giving us a clear view into how everybody's going to need to adapt, even if they're on different platforms, different sizes, different shapes, and how this levels the playing field for the consumers. I want to really talk more about the final rule. What are the critical steps for businesses? What do they need to take action on immediately to ensure that they're compliant? And I want to open this up to everybody, but I want to start with you, Linda. You're the one that's probably going to get the phone call if they're not compliant. So we'll start with you first.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with JR, by the way, that a lot of companies saw this coming, and the operational pieces, the notice, the consent, the cancellation, that may have to be tweaked or tightened up. But fundamentally, many companies had that already in place, because if you've been watching what the FTC has been doing in this area, just in their enforcement actions, you could see that this is where they were going and ultimately what they wanted. And we are receiving a lot of calls about this. What we're doing with our clients or telling folks to do is you really have to look at your whole customer journey now, particularly because of the prohibition on misrepresentations, which is really like the kitchen sink. You have to start with your advertising, your calls to action. What are you telling them there? For example, if you're doing a free trial and all your advertising says is free, and they don't find out that they're going to be charged unless they cancel, let's say, until they get to the transaction point, that's going to be considered misleading by the FTC. So you really have to start from the outset of the customer journey. And then I think you have to go through the buy flow. You have to go through each step, whether it's online or by phone or in person. I want to remind people that this actually applies to in person as well. And obviously that's going to be a much harder channel to monitor, but it applies everywhere. But I think you have to look at that, and then you have to see how the consumer progresses. And then ultimately, the most critical piece, but not the only piece, is going to be the checkout piece. And what does the consumer see there? Are they seeing the notice? Is it in the right place? Is it clear and conspicuous? And what is the consent mechanism? And then you have to look at your cancellation. That has really, you can tell just because the rule is now called click to cancel. That is the holy grail for the FTC. And I think that means not just looking at how you essentially set up your cancellation process. You really need to look at your consumer complaints, because you may think it's simple, but if you're getting a lot of complaints from consumers who are still saying it's difficult to cancel, you're going to have a hard time convincing the FTC or another regulator that it's a simple method. And I can't emphasize that enough, how often the FTC really gets into the complaints and what's happening in customer service. Mm-hmm. And that can really be the Achilles heel for some companies, where they've really actually tried to do it all correctly, but it's not working for the consumer.
I would love for you to dive into a little bit more about the in-person. Like, that's one thing that we don't think about a lot, because we're so used to subscriptions and other type items being done online. We can do that real easy. We've got the Netflix, and we got the Spotify, and we've got Apple, and we, like, you name it, we can get it online. But there are still a lot of subscriptions that can be started in a physical location. How is the FTC taking a look at that? Does that mean that I have to go into a location to do it? Help us understand what it means when you start these things in a physical location.
Actually, in terms of the in-person, and I love your story because the FTC has actually addressed that. They recognize that if someone signed up online, saying it's got to just be by the same method isn't going to work. That's going to be terrible for the consumer to have to go back to the stores. For in-person, the FTC has said that you have to provide either a phone or online method of cancellation. But in terms of what businesses need to do, and I think some of this is also true for telephone as well, because now you've got variables. You're talking about conversations between your sales reps and the consumer. I think some of it is going to come down to training. I think there's going to have to be training for your sales reps to know what they can and cannot say. And in terms of the notice and disclosure, what we've seen some companies do is actually put the notice on the sales receipt and require the consumer to sign that before they can complete the transaction. Because otherwise, how are you going to really, in an in-person environment, how are you going to document that you provided the notice? Maybe creative folks, Solvpath, will figure that out, but it's definitely going to be a challenge in the retail space for sure. And the disclosures have to be before the consumer provides their billing information. So I think the reps are going to also have to be given some mandatory disclosures that they're going to have to say to the consumer before the consumer provides their billing information. And there's going to have to be monitoring. I can tell you from experience, the FTC knows that the retail in-person environment, and even to some extent, telephone sales, are more difficult to control. Despite best efforts, you're going to have folks that aren't going to do it right. So the monitoring becomes really important. Doing monitoring and making sure that your sales reps are doing what they should be doing, what you told them to do.
That's always the fun part, is getting the human factor to follow something that is restrictive, and it's even more difficult when it's conversational because we tend to use analogies and other things to try and explain something, and it may not always hit just right. Carl, I'd love to get your perspective on some of the things that businesses should be taking immediate action on for their compliance. You hit on a couple earlier, and I'd love for you to dive a little bit deeper into that.
Well, for starters, how Solvpath came about, Solvpath was built for us for our own product. Back then, if it wasn't a requirement, obviously, we're selling Solvpath as a service, and a lot of the data that we see and we share right now, a lot of clients that are utilizing our platform are staying compliant. This is without the FTC concern or the ruling that just came out recently. These are people that just wanted to automate their customer support. They cared about the consumer. And if you let's go back 5 years ago, it was kind of hard to initiate a dispute and a chargeback. 90% of all chargebacks and disputes go through a self-service option. You see a charge on your credit card descriptor, on your statement, you're 2 clicks away and you can file a dispute. Consumers today are much more educated than they were in the past. So people are seeing that. You make it hard for them to cancel. They're just going to go ahead and they're going to hang up that phone, or they're not going to wait for that email to come back. They are trained. They know how it works. They're just going to dispute the charge. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of regulation around that, how consumers today are actually taking advantage of it. So they're there. So if you look at making it hard for them, the ability to resell them another product later down the road pretty much reduces drastically. The ability to save that person and save a sale, save that continuity drops drastically. So getting in front of the consumer based on the data that we've seen over the last 4.5, 5 years, it's all positive. So everything that's Solvpath or other platforms that are focused on retention and automating customer support and a full omni-channel solution that allows them to get access to a self-service mechanism or the ability to get information about a product or anything for that matter, full omni-channel. So phone, email, social, a link or a help desk on our main page. Having access to that is really going to improve the consumer journey and is going to go ahead and just give you the outcome. I think a lot of people today or merchants today are just so fixed in set in their ways of how they've been doing things the last 5, 10, 15 years. So when you tell them they have to change that method, they freak out. But I can tell you this much, most customers that do come in, and that's another thing, you could test the waters very slowly. You could put a self-service help link on your order responder in the beginning. You could play around with a couple of different support flows to really get an idea as like what's making people tick, how is it going to affect my bottom line? And we originally tried to do a podcast weeks ago to try, when we knew about the proposed ruling was going to be coming out soon, to try to tell these people or tell merchants and agencies start preparing and get an idea of how it's going to impact your bottom line. So after the ruling, you could still do that. You could still test different variations of the support flow and how it's going to increase your retention or potentially reduce your retention and what that looks like. But I always tell people this, we built a visual automated customer support technology because we were selling products online using this visual sales funnel. We knew that the visual piece and the ability to sell people into products using these visual sales funnels, we took that same formula and format and applied it to support. And it's very effective. It does work. And I think at the end of the day, anybody that's not running any kind of self-serve mechanism to manage their subscriptions or their orders, I think they're going to be pleasantly surprised. One, the drastic reduction of their customer support costs. Two, the data and the insight that they're going to learn that they never knew before. And three, the control that they're going to have. And I'm not saying it, but we see third-party call centers and people that manage customer support, and they're overseas, but they're not really well dialed in on the product mix. Listen, everybody sees all the AI in the chat. The ability to have more intelligent responses using an automated platform versus using a live person. I mean, the ability to actually have this tailor-made support flow that's very specific to hundreds of data points that will allow the end merchant to potentially have better response. We like the call centers because the call centers should be dealing with more pressing issues, more escalated issues or problems to make sure that consumers getting what they want. And for a lot of merchants that are dealing with what am I going to do with my call center agents, let them do more outreach programs, generating more revenue and dealing again with the 10 to 20%, 10 to 20% of the more of the tickets that need to be escalated. We see the math, we see the data. I'm telling you, like a lot of people that are not running it, when they get into this, if they have a very unique business model, they might have to make a couple more adjustments. But for the most part, I think they're going to be pleasantly surprised with the actual how it's going to impact their bottom line. It's going to be good. It might take them a couple of weeks or a couple of months to get to that sweet spot of where they're happy with the retention and the numbers. But I think they're going to start learning a lot about that customer that they didn't know before.
JR, I don't know what Linda and Carl left out, man, but do you have anything that you would like to add to that fabulous overview of what the businesses need to do?
They took my lines, Ted. I don't know. It's interesting, right? I think not consumers, but merchants need to be aware that post-sale order management is just as important as the pre-sale, right? If you order a product, be it on subscription or one time, and the experience after that is terrible, they're not coming back. They bought from you once. So there's that. There's transparency. Be transparent with your consumer. Make it easy to cancel. Use a pre-canned solution. Make it easy on yourself. There are solutions like Solvpath and others, like Carl mentioned, they're easy to install. The team's there to help you, and they help with compliance. That is what I think I would add. And to wrap that up is don't be afraid of customer drop-off or order drop-off if you're adding an easy solution to cancel. As Carl mentioned, the studies prove that it actually improves it. Maybe somebody puts you on pause and then they pick up that order a couple months later. You're still retaining that customer and you're not doing it forcefully. Transparency, an easy consumer portal, And yeah, that's exactly what I would say.
I think you should be more concerned about the cost and the full refund, depending if you have
Absolutely, your chargeback
associated with getting a chargeback, a $25 fee and a full refund. And if you're on the third billing cycle, I mean, that could be pretty expensive rather quickly. So people they're not looking at the full 360-degree view of what it looks like, a fully matured billing cycle for a customer that comes in 5 billing cycles. And then they made it really hard. They look at the people that came in, the amount of refunds and cancellations and bad reviews and chargebacks that they could get by not doing that is going to be a lot higher than it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think I would end with what I mentioned. Don't be afraid of drop off. If you're running your business correctly and you're transparent, you shouldn't be afraid of it.
I want to just mention one thing to follow up on what JR just said. When the FTC was first thinking about the whole cancellation process, and they were putting that into a lot of their consent orders, and we negotiated some of those. So we've had a lot of conversations with the FTC about this. And their view, but it shouldn't be lost on businesses, is we're only restricting you when the consumer has contacted you for a very specific purpose. There are no restrictions on what you can do to try to get them back after you've processed the cancellation. So just to follow up on JR's point, that's not necessarily the end of the relationship, and it's not necessarily the end of your opportunity to try to get them to come back.
Support provided by Skyflow. What if you could build fast but not break privacy? What if you could ensure data privacy, governance, and compliance with just a few API calls? What if you could worry less about PCI requirements while actually improving privacy and security? How much more time would your team have to truly innovate? How much faster could you build and ship new features? How much more powerful could your app be? Skyflow is a zero-trust data privacy vault delivered as an API. Skyflow's radically simple design lets you collect, secure, and tokenize personal information like card data and payment details. And with built-in features like encrypted data analysis and sharing, anonymization, and advanced governance, your days of choosing between data security and data usability are over. Whether you're just concerned with PCI compliance or need to go further to include CCPA, GDPR, SOC 2, and beyond, Skyflow has you covered. What if you could build fast but not break privacy? With Skyflow, you can. Visit skyflowsecure.com today to learn how.
Well, the win-back programs, again, what JR said, is the post-sale, right? So the same time and energy you put towards acquiring a customer, one, what are you doing to retain them? And if they do cancel a subscription, hey, they might have loved your product. You just sent them 6 bottles and they don't want to be on a rebill. And after 3 months, they might have really loved your product and you want to send them a discount if they were to sign back up and win them back and reactivate their subscription. Those are the types of campaigns, or just a one-time purchase and come back again. So that post-sale strategy, again, a lot of people is just onboard continuity and just set it and forget it. Just that model doesn't work anymore.
Looking at your existing customers are 5 times cheaper to market to than acquiring a new one, right? So you keep them on the books, or you at least keep them in your back pocket. You treat them well, they're coming back.
I think, Carl, I don't remember what conversation it was, but I'd written down in my notes from a conversation. I think I remember it right, but you said something to the effect that if you make the cancellation extremely difficult, you reduce the re-engagement or the follow-on, as you guys have been talking about, easily by 50%, if not more. How are you educating your customers on the long-term perspective and the lifetime value of these customers, of making it easier to cancel and then return with that re-engagement?
Different conversation. When I speak to established brands, LTV is part of their main goal. They might be an agency that's selling multiple types of products. Lifetime value is the main core requirement, that they know that number and they know it very well. So they're doing a lot of the things that we mentioned already, whether they're on Shopify or these other platforms. But some of the newer advertisers that are like only 6 months, 12 months in, that don't have that kind of cash flow, they're trying to find like little ways of trying to get ahead a little bit. Those, I'm trying to educate them as much as possible, explaining them, the long term, this is going to back out well for you. So if you're trying to truly build a brand, these are the steps that you have to take. And it's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would have a successful continuity brand. But it's typically getting past those first few months to break even or turn a small profit. That's the right mindset. To try to turn a profit on day one is you have to have an amazing product at a very low cost to acquire a customer to achieve that. And if you do, God bless. But those are the practices you should still follow. And by the way, before this was even a compliance thing, we've been trying to Jayare and I would really try to promote these numbers and this message and it just so happens it's compliance now that's a requirement, but we have a lot of clients that were utilizing this self-serve automation tool and this subscription mechanism for some time already, been benefiting from this, obviously multiple benefits. Like I said earlier, drive down customer support costs, control, data and analytics. There's a lot of benefits of getting access to this. So I think it's going to be a really good thing for a lot of advertisers. The advertisers that are been trying to manipulate and trying to do things the wrong way, they're not going to like it. And I just think they're slowly getting weaned out anyway, because there's obviously other things on your side of the payment side where for rebills, these MCC codes, the higher risk, the nutraceuticals, the higher risk MCC codes, they've been dealing with problems with approval rates. Now you throw this on top of it, that's going to hurt the retention and their approval rates. So I give it 12 months. And I think some of these, unless they change their ways, I think those people will most likely be out of the business anyway. Yeah, which I don't think is a bad thing.
I don't have any solid data that I can point to, but I can go anecdotally that a lot of these declines in the transactions that people are seeing today are merely based upon the potential of the consumer not being able to cancel. Like there are the issuers do look at these things. They're looking at, hey, how many people in this demographic that live in this area that have this income, that have this level of debt, they look at all of these different things and say, what is the likelihood that this consumer is going to file a chargeback? What's the likelihood that they're going to cancel the subscription? What are the likelihoods? And they're taking all that. And a lot of these guys are using machine learning in the background to look at all of these stuff in near real time to make a decision based upon those things. And what starts the whole thing is that merchant category code. That's the first thing they look at. They look at that piece. Then they look at the behavior of that particular merchant account number on the system. So all of these things start to compound. And I believe that with these rules in place, and like I mentioned earlier, the car brands having a little bit of air cover from the Federal Trade Commission, you're going to start to see some of these approvals increase. Now, are they going to go from, I'm going to make numbers up, are they going to go from 40% to 90%? No, they're not going to do that. There's a lot of things that have to happen in the whole ecosystem. And there's some very specific things that the merchants need to do to make that happen. I've been able to do that for a handful of people and to get them to those higher approval rates, but that's a lot of work. And it's like you mentioned, looking at it long term. And for some of the folks that are just getting started, we haven't really touched on this today, but just getting one strike where the FTC feels it's bad enough, because one of the things I did notice, Linda, in this is it isn't guaranteed that they're going to get a fine of $5,000 per instance or greater. It is, they may get that fine. They may get more than one. It may be more than $5,000.
So let me it's 50,000.
50,000. I have my decimal place in the wrong spot.
But it's 50,000 per violation. So, and they can also get redress. So what will happen, and this is true stories because it happens all the time, if you try to settle the case with the FTC, they will come in with their initial demand can often be the full amount of the penalties, which could be in the hundreds of millions, because per violation, it hasn't been defined in a crystal clear way. In the case of direct response, it's likely going to be each person that responded to the offer.
Based on prior precedents? Is that where you're getting that from?
Yeah. Yep. And then similarly redress. And you're right. That's not what you're ultimately going to have to pay, but that's going to be their starting point. So when you get down to, you're still, depending on how egregious the violation is, you could be looking at multi-million-dollar settlements. And I do want to say, for younger companies that may be looking, startups and relatively new companies that may be thinking, well, I don't have that money, so they're not going to get that money from me. What they do in those cases is they name the individuals so they can go after their individual assets. And they will then often settle on what they call ability to pay. So they'll look at what your assets are and then look to take those assets. So in many cases, it can be excruciatingly painful. And often that is for, the smaller companies and those that don't really have the ability to pay. I would say investing in compliance, whether it's through legal or providers like Solvpath, it's a good investment, because the other thing is, if you're a company and you don't really think you have the ability to manage this yourself, one of the things that does resonate with the FTC is, have you made a good faith effort to comply? And if you've done your due diligence on a provider that does this and has expertise in doing this, even if something goes wrong, you're going to be in a much better position, because you will be perceived as basically as a good player. Something went wrong, but you made your best efforts to comply. And that really goes a long way with the FTC.
Now let's quickly shine a spotlight on a game changer in the financial world, ClearingWorks. Simplify your financial management with a one-stop solution for all your AR needs, and with a single login. Are you intrigued? Visit clearingworks.com to schedule your demo today.
We had a customer for the state of California. Now, obviously, it wasn't the Federal Trade Commission, but they saw that our software was in there. They were offering a self-serve mechanism. They didn't find them, and the fine would have been substantial for the state of California, but it was enough for them. They did request a few adjustments to be made to the support flow, and they made them, and we were the silver lining. So just like you said, obviously, as long as you made it, showing that you're making an effort, you have a solution or a tech stack, you're not tucking it away intentionally, it's pretty straightforward. They were willing to work with them, and they were able to avoid a substantial fine.
Yeah, and I think if we look at this, the cost of doing nothing, the cost of continuing to do it the way you've always done it, because you think you're going to get a little bit of a short-term financial gain, and maybe you think you're one of these whiz-bang people that have got all of your stuff set up so it looks like you have no assets. That's fantastic to think that, but just know that your business can be shut down in a heartbeat if you're not even trying to do this. And I think that's comes back to, Carl, like what you said, you got to look at it from the long-term perspective. The short-term gain is only going to be that. And we don't know, because we haven't run through one of these yet with this new rule. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know how those business owners that just refuse to comply are going to be looked at across the banking sector, across anything that has to do with finances. We don't know how they're going to be looked at and or treated going forward. So I like what you guys are saying. Let's err on the side of caution. Let's put some things in place that may seem a little different than the way that you've been doing. I was trying to use the right words to say that. A little different than what you've been doing. But I want to keep going down the path of talking about what to do to keep moving forward. I would like to understand, looking ahead as much as we can, right? In the next 12, I'm not even going to go beyond that because this is so new. In the next 12 months, I'm going to start with you, JR, but like in the next 12 months, what are you expecting to see in the marketplace happen in the next 12 months?
I expect exactly what I think should be expected, right? I know that's probably a little bit profound, but
go meta on us, man.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a fair ruling for the most part. I think, as Carl mentioned, you've got those bad actors, those bad players in the space. Maybe they'll slowly start to disappear. There's a lot of guys out there looking to make a dime and kind of fly by night under the radar. And the ones who still want to play nice in the subscription space, I think they're going to do just fine. 12 months, it seems like a lot of time. It's not a heck of a lot of time, much as 180 days isn't. For a business to flip their whole model on their head and to adjust in that amount of time, it may be difficult for some, but if you want to play in the sandbox, you better adjust.
Bring your shovels and your buckets to the sandbox, people. You're going to be building the castle.
That's it.
I appreciate that, JR. Carl, we've talked about a bunch of different things. You talked about a bunch of different things that people can do, the way you're going, the way that Solvpath's prepared to support this. But what are some things that maybe we haven't talked about that you see as a response to this happening over the next 12? And JR made a good point, maybe 24 months from a business perspective.
Linda probably has a better understanding of how aggressive they're going to come out. I know the government's always looking to figure out ways of finding people and making money. And I think these fines seem to be pretty hefty. And there's a lot of subscription-based businesses. I don't know how many hundreds of billions, maybe it's up there. So I would imagine this is going to be a big money grab. So I think as soon as people start getting wind that people are being fined, and the FTC is very serious, unfortunately, I think that's when people are going to start moving. Hopefully they move sooner because, again, outside of this being a compliant issue, I think there's a lot of benefits. Again, I keep talking about the benefits of a self-serve, full omni-channel solution, whether you're in the continuity space or just in managing orders and subscriptions. It carries over to that as well. So we see a lot of people doing bundle package straight sales, or they want to make that customer support experience as smooth as possible. So I think it carries over. Again, I'm not really concerned for a lot of my clients there now because they understand it. They see the benefit and the upside. And I just think, again, some of the teaching old dog new tricks, they're not happy with changing things. So we work with some of the large TV guys. I know they're on a little more antiquated platforms. That's going to be interesting to see how fast they can pivot. We are also an open API. We do have the ability to actually do those integrations and get a basic mechanism in place pretty quickly. But I think a lot of people that were doing things a little bit of the old way, telephone is old, then email. Let's face it, 5-10 years ago, it was on your autoresponder, your main webpage, you had a phone option, you had an email option. Hey, you need a self-service option there. There's a link that needs to go there to allow those people, whether it's a help center, something to get that customer what they want. Not because it's required. It's the consumers are reaching for it. So give it to them. And if that's the mean and the channel they want to go down to go ahead and manage their subscription, give it to them. I think, again, when you start seeing the numbers of the save rates and the take rates and the happy customers that you're going to get, but again, I explained those statistics before, you making something extremely difficult and complicated for a customer to cancel, and you bill them more than, depending on the dollar amounts that you're charging to, I think those disputes and those chargeback fees, along with the full refunds right behind them, and the resources required to go ahead and manage chargebacks, far exceed the upside you're going to get on making it difficult for somebody to cancel their subscription. So if you're looking at lifetime value, it all comes back to this again. This is post-sale strategy, re-engaging the customer. So much time and energy to acquire a customer. What are you doing to retain them? Put that same time and energy and thought into another campaign. And then you have another campaign to re-engage existing customers that have canceled. And there's another campaign to re-engage customers for a one-time purchase for the holidays. There's so many different ways, but to think you're just going to onboard someone, throw them in that funnel, and then they're just going to stay there forever. It's just not how it works.
If I wasn't worried about a copyright strike right now, I'd really throw in Black Eyed Peas, Where is the Love? Because that's what went in my head. So hopefully I don't get a copyright strike for even just saying it. But Linda, we've talked about a bunch of these pieces. I'd like to get your perspective too, but maybe just expand it just a little bit and say, how do you see this impacting other regulations and the industry wide? What kind of shifts are you seeing this might trigger?
One of the important things for people to understand, unfortunately, and Carl alluded to this earlier, is unlike CAN-SPAM, which regulates email marketing, when the FTC passed that, it preempted all the state laws. And that was a really good thing because some of the states were coming out with opt-in regimes. And so the industry was clamoring actually for a preemptive rule and got it. In this case, the rule does not preempt state law. And you already have two of the largest states, California and New York, that have some restrictions that are even more rigorous than these in terms of notice. Because this rule is so prescriptive, the customer experiences are going to start to look somewhat similar in terms at the critical points of where you're making a decision and you're consenting to the purchase. That also, apart from the fear of regulation, may create some competitive pressures for companies to get on board, because I think consumers may become more aware of where the experience has been a user-friendly one and where it hasn't.
That is something that I was thinking about as we were going through this discussion, as I was reading all of this, is the similarity. I think what I'm hearing and what I'm reading about is once somebody has figured out the way that is acceptable, that meets the criteria, that maybe pushes the boundaries just a little bit, you're going to see that be used over and over and over and over again until someone breaks the mold yet again. And hopefully there are more merchants and more businesses out there that are looking at this as a proactive approach versus a wait and see what they do when the first person gets the call from the FTC. I'm really hopeful for that piece of it.
If I could play the FTC historian for a minute.
Please do.
I'd like to analogize this a little bit to early 2000 when the FTC came out with its telemarketing sales rule, which in some ways was a precursor to this whole negative option thing, because at that point, what they were focused on were the sort of third-party post-transactions where you could basically, the first merchant could pass on the consumer to a second merchant, and the second merchant could use the account information that had been provided to the first merchant. So it was called pre-acquired account information transactions. And as part of its telemarketing sales rule, and also ROSCA, which was the precursor to all of this, but only applied to online transactions, both the FTC and Congress basically prohibited that. They said you cannot pass on that credit card information or account information. The merchant has to get it directly from the consumer. And I remember at that time concerns about the sky is falling and, oh my God, we're not going to be able to survive this. What are we going to do? Because this is how we've been operating. And I'm not aware of a single company that didn't survive this. And in fact, at the end of the day, there were a lot of businesses reported that it was better for business. It had minimal impact on conversion rates, and it improved stick rates. So you may very well see the same thing here.
Quick question for you regarding chatbots and AI phone avatars and IVRs. Where does that fall in place in reference to what it would be considered compliant or not?
If you are going to use a chatbot, you have to basically disclose the fact that you're using a chatbot, and there are privacy disclosures that have to be made. But the rule does address that and say that you cannot, unless the consumer had to engage with a person or a chatbot when they signed up, you cannot require them to engage with a person or a chatbot to cancel. So there is that symmetry there between how you signed up and how you cancel.
We're back to that, making it just as easy to cancel as it was to sign up.
Got it.
Yeah.
Right.
So for phone, I suppose it could be an IVR or something, but basically they're saying if the consumer didn't have to interact with anyone, whether real or virtual, to sign up for the transaction or enroll, you cannot make them do that to cancel.
Just to cancel. Gotcha.
Got it.
And I did have a question for you, Ted.
Oh, shoot, man.
We were talking briefly about, because you're an understanding of payment processing and transactions, this new requirement for the consent on the transaction and on the order and the subscription itself. Those are two pieces. From your experiences, if the FTC ever made any adjustments there, did you ever see like Visa or the card types ever swaying or aligning themselves with the FTC? Because I feel like there's a bit of overlap here now, right? You have the Visa, MasterCard requirements for consent on a negative option. And then now we actually have the FTC has their own consent. How do you see that potentially playing out?
I think I mentioned it earlier, is that they are so aligned right now. But I will say that the card brand rules around notice are still there. You have to notify them of the transaction. And it's funny, I couldn't find the email because I was going to show it to you guys today. But there is a service that I use that basically being so preemptive with this is that I signed up for an annual subscription with them. And they said, you know what? Hopefully you're enjoying the use of this product, but we're not going to auto renew this. If you want to renew it and continue using the product because we want you to be happy, click here to continue your subscription. And those are the types of things that have been set on the card brand side of the house where you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to do those sorts of things. Now, mind you, you don't have to not build them, but you're supposed to notify them with a appropriate amount of time. And again, it's a very open-ended piece to what appropriate is, but those things are there. And that's why I called the card brands getting a little bit of extra air coverage from the FTC, is that now when they say, hey, you have to do this, they're going to have a little bit more weight behind it. And they already understand that. And this kind of goes back also to the point of, if you are doing these things right, that means that when the issuer, not Visa or MasterCard, because they don't make the decision, it's the bank that issued the credit card that makes the decision on whether to accept the transaction or decline the transaction. It's also the bank that issued the card that decides whether you're going to win or lose the chargeback. It's also the issuer that decides whether or not that customer, that card holder, can continue to use that card. And by laying all these different pieces out, by being clear with the intention of the subscription, being clear with the ability to cancel it, being clear with the consent, like these things are things that the card brands have been pushing really, really hard down to the merchants and through all of the sales channels to ensure that has been done. but they haven't had much more leverage than just saying, hey, your business is no longer going to be able to accept credit cards. This takes it to that next level. This gives them that bit of additional weight of that $50,000 per instance as a potential beginning starting point. Whereas with the card brands, they could have said that, but it's a different ballgame. But I do see that they will now be enforcing it more now than ever. And I also think that they're probably going to be one of the first notification points that the FTC is going to start to get, because they're going to be able to see that really, really quickly. They're already looking at these things. They're already looking at the customer reports. They're looking at all these different areas. So I have a feeling that the FTC is going to get a lot of tips for the breach in the protocol and the rule from these organizations that have already started to put this in place. That's my long-winded way of saying I think they're going to play well together in the sandbox with their shovels and their pails.
So if you're doing things that you're not supposed to, I would imagine your alerts and your chargebacks are through the roof, and that'll be enough information to alert the FTC to inquire and investigate further.
Especially when you look at the chargeback reason codes. The chargeback reason codes are going to tell the card brands, are going to tell the issuers, and that's going to be a red flag that goes up. Returns are going to be another thing that a lot of people don't think about. If your return rate is too high, that could be another flag. There's so many data points that are available in a credit card transaction that will allow you to preemptively identify a potential wrongdoer in this case.
And I will say that the chargeback rates are such an important evidentiary piece to the FTC in any investigation. Even if you're slightly below the threshold for being put on a list or subject to fines, and you argue we haven't exceeded the card thresholds, and the FTC will still look at it like 1% of 100 million people or 2% of 100 million people. That's a lot of people. And so it's one of the first places they go, and we've tried it's consumer fraud, and consumers know it's easy to get a chargeback, and there's no real push. We've tried all the defenses, and they generally fall on deaf ears. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is such a critical piece in any FTC inquiry. It's one of the first places they go.
And there've been attempts to do right by the cardholder, the consumer, from the card brands through services that immediately refund the money, but that is not even a Band-Aid for the problem. That's like telling somebody to walk it off when they broke their leg. I mean, it really falls into that case, because the only place that changes the perception is really in the merchant's eyes of how that approaches. You can get alerted that when a chargeback is going to be in, and yes, you can take actions for it, but the perception, like you mentioned, Linda, when someone investigates it, is not going to be on the positive side of the house. Now, don't get me wrong, alerts, notifications, the rapid dispute resolutions, like all of these tools all have their place, and they all do really, really well, but they're not meant to fix the problem. They're really meant to let you know that there's a problem so that you can fix it. And if you don't fix it, that's when it's going to be used, as you mentioned, as evidence to the greater problem that they decided not to fix.
If you look at the full ecosystem, transactions, payments, retention, there's so many pieces that have to be running at the same time to run a successful continuity program. So I'd like to leave it on a positive note. I think people, again, back to what I said, is when it comes to retention and churn, I think these people that are not using any kind of technology, whether it be Solvpath or another automated self-serve mechanism for click to cancel, I think they'll be pleasantly surprised with the actual performance. Just to give you an idea, in a lot of cases, we actually outperform a live agent when it comes to saving a sale or saving a customer. And the ability to very easily A/B split test variations is much easier in that format than it is by training an agent.
So you got me wanting to leave with good news. So let me follow up with your good news a little bit more. When you're looking at the payment side of the house, if you're doing these things right, and if you're following the different protocols and you're looking at all these tools as ways to identify a problem area, that is an opportunity for you to increase your income, increase your revenues on the bottom line. Because when you fix those things, that means your expenses go down and your sales go up. So that's my positivity for today. Well, everybody, I appreciate you hopping on. Linda, thank you so much for hopping on. Carl, JR, you guys have shared like a ton of insights, and I appreciate you guys dragging a few insights out of me. I'm not used to being on the other side of the table, so I really appreciate it. I think one of the big things that is super important to understand that we have the 4 core tenets of the rule, the different ways to approach it, is the fact that this can be positive for a business if you use it right. And I think taking action now is only going to make things better for you in the long run. And if you've made it this far, go ahead, hit share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. If you want to learn more about Solvpath, or Linda and her team, we're going to go ahead and put links in the show notes below. Just click and head on over there. They'll answer any of the questions that you have. And as always, keep moving forward. As we wrap up today's episode, I've got one last thing for you. If you're in the trenches fighting fraud and financial crime, you know it's a complex battlefield. That's where Hawk's AI tools for real-time payment screening, AML, transaction monitoring, and dynamic customer risk rating come into play. These aren't just buzzwords. They're game changers designed to make your compliance more effective and less of a headache. Imagine slashing through false positives with precision and giving your compliance strategy the edge it needs. Head on over to gethawkai.com to sign up for a demo and discover how their platform can revolutionize how you fight fraud and financial crime.
This has been a production of DD3 Media with all rights reserved. This is provided for informational purposes only. It is not offered or intended to be used as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. We strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, but will not be responsible for any missing facts or inaccurate information. You comply and understand that you should use any of this information at your own risk. Cryptocurrencies are highly volatile financial assets, so research and make your own financial decisions.